In this tutorial, we're going to be making kind of a ground fog for use in our projects. So in order to do this, we're just going to make a new folder and we're going to call this fog. Then in here, we'll right click and we'll say a new material. And maybe we'll call this kind of smoke master, because this is going to be kind of a fog and a smoke type and clouds, that kind of thing basically. And we're going to have control over the kind of textures and opacity and things like that through this master material. And then we'll link that to a particle system. So the first thing we want to do is set up our actual material, and we're going to want to have this as translucent and probably get away with setting this to unlit as well, so make it nice and cheap. So the first thing we're going to want to do is add a particle color node into here. And basically what this does is it'll allow us from within the particle system itself to control the color and importantly the alpha kind of over time. So we can have the particle kind of gradually fade into existence and then fade out of existence at the end of its life, that kind of thing. Next we'll add in a free vector, and we're just going to put a colour in this for now. So basically let's convert this to a parameter and we'll call this base colour. And this will enable us to just add a kind of colour value to our particle system, and we're going to combine that with a hold down T and left click to add a texture sample, and again convert this to parameter. So these two combined will give us the colour for our particles. Okay, so if we press M and add a multiply, we're going to want to multiply these two parameters together. And then we'll add another multiply in and we'll multiply our particle colour as well. So we have numerous kind of ways to control the colour of our particle. So next we'll add another multiply and we'll use the alpha of our particle colour in A, drag that into opacity. And basically this now means that when I'm using the particle system itself, the controls in that particle system will enable me to control the opacity. Now we're going to need more stuff than that, so we'll hold down T and left click to add in a texture sample, and we'll convert this again to a parameter, and we will just call this opacity text. The next thing we'll do is add a depth fade. And what this will enable us to do is to control the kind of fall off of the particle as it connects with the ground and so on. So I'll show you exactly what that's doing once we get a particle system in the scene. So we'll hold down S and left click to add a scalar. I'm going to call this fade distance. And I'll drop that into my fade distance there, and I'll drop this into my RGB. So if we add in another multiply, pressing M on your keyboard and left clicking, and then S and click to add a scalar, and we'll call this one fog intensity. Then we'll link those together like so. Now we might want to use different texture chords on here. So let's just add an add node into here, drop this into here, S for another scalar, call this UV chords, and then we'll add a texture coordinate into. And then we should be able to drag that into here. So what's going on here is we are going to use a depth fade to get some to fade out the particles when they're kind of near a surface, so we don't get that kind of harsh edge. And then we're multiplying that into the opacity, which is also controlled by our particle system itself. So yeah, that's all that last multiply does. Just drag this over here just to make it a bit more clear. We can control the opacity with fog intensity, and we can control how much the particle fades out when it's near a surface with this. So let's just save that. And what I'll do is here, I'll just go to my alphas folder, and I'm just going to put one of these into there. And we'll put one of these into there, just to get rid of those errors. I don't think it would really matter if we left those errors in anyway, but I'll just for the sake of getting rid of those warnings. So we can see we've got our smoke master now. If we just do create material instance on that, we can see we can control the base color texture, the opacity texture, fade distance, the intensity of the opacity, and our UV chords, and our base color as well. So let's drop in a particle system then to mess around with this. So we'll right click and we'll go to new particle system. We'll drop that straight into our scene. And we'll double click here, or double click here to load the particle system itself. Now if we just go to required, we want to set our material to our instance here. And then we'll just double click here, and what we'll need to do is, because by default we've got the intensity on 0, so we'll just put that up to 100 to show you. You can see that by default having that on 0 means we're not going to see anything. So why don't we just go back into our master, just for the kind of sake of making this more usable for any other kind of artists that need to use it. If we just set our default value to 1 here, we want our UV chords default value on 1 as well. Well, actually no, we probably want that on 0, so we'll leave that on 0. So this just defines whichever UV coordinates we're going to use. Now normally 0 is your standard base, 1 is your light map, and so on. And fade distance, we'll just leave that on there so I can show you what it's doing. Right, so straight away we can see we've kind of created something here. So let's just start adding in a bunch more things. So the first thing we want to set, we've got a lifetime here. So let's just increase that a bit to say 4 and 6. So that means the particles will live a lot longer, as you can see. Our initial size, we probably want to do that quite a lot bigger. So I'm just going to do this locked axis to X, Y, Z, and then increase this, say 100 and 300. So we've got some nice big kind of particles going on here. Basically, we want them nice and big because these are going to be scattered along most of the floor in this case. And we want a nice variety in them, so we have more variety in the kind of overall scene, because it's going to be such a big area this thing's filling up. So we've got our lifetime set, our initial size set, our initial speed. We want to, by default, it's kind of moving that way a little bit, that way a little bit, so 10 and minus 10. But in terms of height, it's moving a lot more. So let's just bring this down to maybe 15. I don't really want to get it going any lower, so we'll leave that one on 0. So what we want to do next is add a location, and we'll add a cylinder, because we're going to have this kind of all along this kind of circular floor area. We just select the cylinder. The location basically refers to where do the particles spawn when they first come in. So initially it's just on a single point, but we've now added a cylinder, which means they will spawn within the area of that cylinder. So I'm going to go to my start radius and I'm going to increase that to say 600. And we can see now we've got the rough shape of the cylinder there, and they're spawning kind of all along that floor. If we just go to our options and just hit that, that will center that object. Assuming you, of course, you've made your world with the kind of center of your area being the center 0, 0, 0. Okay, so now we've got them spawning kind of all around the room. I could increase that a little bit more. just so they're right to the edge there. So the next thing, maybe you'll increase the height a little bit of this as well, like so. Right, so the next thing to notice, you can see how they're all kind of popping in at kind of quite slow intervals, and that's to do with the actual spawn rate. So if you just go to the spawn option here, this constant value here, this basically says how many are going to spawn in every second. So if we increase that massively, you'll see they'll all come in, and when it hits its limit, it won't spawn anymore until some of these have died. So maybe if we just put this up to, say, 100, and then if we go to required here, scroll down, you will find your max draw count there. So that's the total, the maximum it'll spawn before it stops spawning and waits for them to die. So I'm going to increase that to, say, 1,000. We've got quite a lot there. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is look at our color over life. So alpha over life here, this is our important control. Basically, this determines the opacity over life. So our in value is 0. The in value refers to the time. So 0 to 1. So 0 is the birth of the particle, and 1 is the death of the particle. So an out value of 1 means fully visible. So we're going to put that to 0 because that means completely invisible. So this is basically saying when our particle is born, have it completely invisible. Now our second point, we're going to put that to, say, 0.3. So that means when the particle is 33% of the way through its life, we will have it completely visible. So you see now the particles come in like so, and then when they get to the end of their life, they just vanish instantly. So what we need to do to fix that is add another point. So I just hit this button to add a point, and we go for our in value as 1. That means when the particle is completely at the very end of its life. And then we'll have the out value at 0, which means it's completely invisible. So you should see that they start to now fade out as they die. So that's already looking a lot cleaner, but you'll notice here that we've got this horrible flat edge where the particle meets the floor surface. Now that's exactly why we added in our depth fade here. So we need to control this fade distance. So in our material setting, we can go to fade distance there. Let's just try increasing that to, say, 100. And you can see already that line is now much less clear. We can still make it out, but it's nowhere near as obvious as it was before. So let's try increasing that even more to, say, 200. Now you can see we're really starting to achieve, well, I don't really know what the effect is, but it's kind of looks like, I don't know, some kind of weird hazy red smoke, whatever. So, is there anything else we can control? Well, obviously, we can start messing around with our colour more. You can drop in different... I only have 2 in here, to be honest. I should have more, but let's see if we've got any other weird textures. They're going to look strange, but at least we'll show you how much control you have over this. So, let's try putting that normal map in there. So obviously you can see, you can start getting some kind of really insane results. Obviously you wouldn't use that kind of thing. What you want to be using is a colour map that basically has quite an even amount of colour and no kind of really harsh kind of edges, because obviously they're going to come out at that point. So there's one more thing I want to change. If I just go back to the particle system again. So basically what we've said is we have a maximum number of particles. We're spawning 100 particles until we hit, every second until we hit our limit. When the particles die, it will spawn new ones in. So it's good to have a good variety between your min and max life so that you don't just suddenly spawn in loads more. So let me show you what I mean by that. So if I put my min and max both exactly the same. So all the particles have 6 seconds of life. And we put our spawn rate up to say 1,000. If you watch when those particles die, it will suddenly spawn in a load more, like that. So if we just put some variety in the lifetime, say 2.5, 6 seconds, and reduce our spawn rate back down again, so there is a bit of a time between, these will spawn in, and when some of them die, new ones will spawn in, and so on like that. So you just get that variety between spawn times. You can mess around with all these other settings as well, of course. So let's just try putting that to say 100 and that to 10, and we can have all these rise up a lot more, create some really kind of weird effects. So you can also, one last thing to show you, if I just go back to my instance here, what can be good is just to have a bunch of different alphas to mess around with and a bunch of different color maps to mess around with. So I can try dropping these in and I can achieve some different results. Depending on the kind of effect you're after, you can achieve a lot just by changing your alpha, changing your color maps. You don't even need to do too much in the particle system. In the particle system itself, I can obviously do things like control so much anyway. I've just made them quite a lot larger here. So one other thing I'm going to do in here actually is at the moment the particles spawn and then they rise up, but they don't rotate in any way. So if we just go to rotation rate, if we add an initial rotation rate to this, see it's pretty crazy by default. So I'm just going to put this to 0.05, say 0.1, and now we have some rotation. Now they're all rotating on the same way, but what you can do is just put minus 0.1, so some will rotate this way and some will rotate that way, just to get even more variety in that. We do have one more color control we can sort. So in our color over life, at the moment we've controlled our opacity here, so that when they're born, they're invisible, they become 100% visible short time after that, and gradually fade out till they die. I think we should be able to control some of our color here as well. So we can have, say, a slight hint of red as they're born, going out to a bit of blue at the end. So you've got numerous ways to kind of control the colour with this FX. You can control the colour over life, so the colour changes as the particle gets older. But we also have the ability to control it here as well. And obviously with our colour image too. So plenty of controls there to mess around with. Remember as well, if we want to change our overall opacity rather than doing it over life, we can do it just in here and just have that kind of subtle hint. So this could also be used for other things. So if we just make another new particle system here. In fact, what I might do is delete that and we'll just duplicate this one. Add that into the scene. And on this one, you could do things like, if we just change the velocity here, so rather than changing up there, I could change my X and have them all kind of move in that way. So to create kind of like a weird kind of wind effect, I guess. And maybe ramp that up as well. And you can even do things like the spawn rate here. If I just change my cap down here to say 150, we'll spawn a few. They'll live till their time, and then when they die, we'll spawn a new load. So you can use this cap here the cap on the amount of particles and the amount that you spawn to actually generate kind of bursts as well. Then we'll duplicate our material, drop that into there, and then we could do the same thing again, just mess around with some of these ones like that. One thing I probably should have done in the other one is do an initial rotation here so that they come in. So we have this rotation rate. Basically that defines how much they rotate round. Initial rotation defines when it first spawns the actual rotation percentage of, so the actual rotation degrees that it starts on. So maybe for this one we'll increase the initial rotation rate a little bit as well. Go to initial size here, increase that even more. Like that. So got a completely different effect kind of there as well.